This is the new 2021 Audi RS7, and it is a monster. 600 horsepower turbocharged V8 does 0 to 60 in 3.6 seconds. It is also an opulent luxury car with a sticker price of around $125,000 and a lot of nice trimmings and luxury features. Most importantly, it is the newest Audi RS car. And today, I'm going to review it. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my new online enthusiast car auction website for modern enthusiast cars. If you're looking to buy or sell a cool car from the modern era, the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and up, check out Cars and Bids at carsandbids.com. I've borrowed this RS7 from Audi Beverly Hills, one of the Fletcher Jones family of dealerships. Audi Beverly Hills is the largest Audi dealer in the nation. This is the place Audi Beverly Hills sells more Audis than anyone else in the United States, and they have them all. The new RS Q8, the new RS6 Avant, the new A8, and now this, the new RS7, which is just starting to arrive in dealerships. So let's talk RS7. The Audi A7 originally debuted almost 10 years ago as sort of a sportier, more stylish alternative to a typical mid-size sedan. Now, the original RS7, which I've reviewed, was great. 560 horsepower, 520 pound-feet of torque. But this turns things up a bit. 590 horsepower, 590 pound-feet of torque, and it can do 190 miles an hour in a mid-size luxury hatchback sedan thing. This is a big deal because it helps build the Audi performance lineup here in North America. Audi has given us a lot of new models over the last few years, and especially high-performance RS models. You have the RS3, the RS5, the RS Q8, the new RS6, and now this. It really rounds out the lineup, and it brings Audi ever closer to having RS being a true competitor for BMW M and Mercedes AMG here in North America. And today I'm going to review this RS7 and show you how it stacks up. First, I'm going to take you on a tour of it and show you all the quirks and features of the latest Audi RS car. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a DOUGSCORE. Alright, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the RS7 with walking up to the car. You unlock it and you can see the headlights do a little dance to show you that they've recognized you, which looks cool. Same deal in back if you approach from behind with the taillights. I've shown this in a few Audi models, but I like to mention it because it is a neat thing to see what all these automakers are doing with LED lighting these days. It just looks cool, frankly. And speaking of lighting, another cool thing this car does, when you open the door and you're in the dark or a parking garage, you can see it projects the words Audi Sport onto the ground, so you know you're in a particularly sporty Audi. Although it doesn't have to project it onto the ground, now it's projecting it onto my hand, which looks even cooler than the ground. I guess that's something you can do if you're easily amused, as I am. Also, one other thing I like, when you're getting into the RS7, the key actually says RS on the back. Not just a typical Audi key, but an RS one. I bring this up because BMW M keys aren't really that distinctive from regular BMW keys. They just have the M colors, and they put that on the M Sport models as well. And Mercedes AMG doesn't get a distinctive key at all. So it's kind of neat to see an Audi RS specific key. Makes you feel a little bit better if you're looking at your key, or you put your key on the table and just hope people notice your RS logo. Next up, before I climb in the RS7, I want to discuss one exterior feature I really like, and that would be the black optics package. This is $2,750 extra, and it blacks out a few trim pieces throughout the car, the badges in the front and the back. It makes it look a little cleaner, but what I especially like is the wheels. These are not black, even though they're part of the black optics package, but just look at how nice they look, and they have this cool texture in them. These are 22-inch wheels, massive, but they look really, really nice. These are absolutely the wheels I would get on the RS7, the RS6, basically any Audi RS car that I could now. Next up, climbing inside the RS7, and I want to go back to lighting because this car does something very cool when you climb inside. It lights up the rim around the seatbelt buckle, which is tremendously useful. How many times have you gotten in a car at night and you can't quite find where the buckle is? Well, now it's lit up so you can easily see exactly where you're buckling your seatbelt. That is a pretty cool touch. I wish more cars had it. And it's worth noting that yes, the RS7 does have 3 individual seats back here, 2 on the sides and 1 center seat. I say that because a lot of these sloped roof cars were pitched as 4-seater coupes. I can't remember if the RS7 was initially, but the Mercedes CLS, the Porsche Panamera, but the RS7 does have 5 seats, including a rear middle seat. But anyway, since I'm back here, let's talk rear seats, and specifically rear seat room. With these slopey roof 4-door coupe cars, often the slopey roof, which looks cool on the outside, robs rear seat headroom because of its design. But as I sit in this car, I'm 6'3", 6'4", one or the other, and I have no real problem with headroom. I'm just right up against the ceiling, but it's not like I'm turning my head over like in some slopey roof cars. As for legroom, very good in here. This is a little bigger than your traditional mid-size car, and it definitely feels like it in the back seat. If you're just sitting back here, you have a nice comfortable amount of room. It would be a good place to spend time even for adults. And there are some nice amenities back here too. This particular RS7 has 4-zone climate control, meaning 2 zones in front and 2 more in back, which are controlled by this screen in the center and the rear seats. You can see, just move your fingers around. You can change the temperature, the airflow, whatever. You also have heated rear seats back here, which is nice. And you also have 2 individual USB-C ports for charging back here. I like to see that, the latest technology, the best charging, but you also have a cigarette lighter style outlet in addition if you want to charge even more stuff. So there's 3 seats back here and 3 charging ports. That's pretty good. You won't even see 3 charging ports in a lot of family SUVs and vans, but the RS7 has it. But while the back has some nice touches, the front is, of course, where you really want to be in this car. And again, I want to start by going back to lighting because there's some cool stuff up here, and specifically my favorite is this little accent light on the side of the center console. You can see it's actually on both sides, driver and passenger, and it just looks cool. The color of this light is changeable. You can configure it to be whatever you want, and I just love the accent light there. Tiny little strip and a nice piece of attention to detail. It makes that stand out. And speaking of the center console, an interesting item in here, in between the cup holders, there's this little hole. Maybe wondering, what is that for? Well, it's for your key. If you get in the car and you're thinking, I have nowhere to put my key, you can stick it in there and it will keep it nice and safe while you drive along. Now, interestingly, this area with the key and the cup holders is kind of a cheap looking plastic. It doesn't really look all that nice, I suspect because they assume stuff will spill out of your drink, so they don't want to put a nice material there because you'll ruin it. But that is the only subpar material in this entire interior. Everything else in here is fantastic, glorious. It looks great. Audi interiors have always been top-notch, and this car really proves that. Everywhere you look, nice design, nice lines, cool, modern, stylish. It's just a really beautiful interior, just like pretty much every other new Audi, especially the high-end stuff like this. By the way, one other interesting lighting item worth mentioning, next to the steering wheel, you have a few stalks coming off, your turn signals, your wipers, your cruise control. That's pretty standard. The cool thing is, at night, your cruise control stalk is lighted. They have lighting in the stalks coming off the steering column. You don't really see that all that often. Unfortunately, the turn signal stalk and the wiper stalk are not lighted. I assume they thought that would just be lighting overload, but I do like that the cruise stalk is lighted. It's not something you'll use every time, so you might forget what's what, and at night that could make it hard to see, so they lit it up. That is smart thinking. And next up, we move on to the infotainment system in this car. Now, I have covered this latest Audi infotainment in a lot of different models, the RSQ8, the e-tron, the new RS6. I will link those reviews in the description below so you can take a longer look. In this car, I'm only going to cover a few highlights, starting with the fact that you have 2 screens, an upper screen and a lower screen. Now, this is a pretty good setup. The lower screen is your climate controls, and you can use it to change the temperature, turn on the heated seats, all of your usual climate control stuff. But you can also use it for various other things in certain circumstances. For instance, when you're entering a navigation destination, the lower screen changes from your climate controls to a writing pad where you can write out where you want to go, and then it will send that info to the navigation system, and then the car will take you there. And that's sort of the benefit of having a screen here for your climate controls. Instead of fixed buttons, you can have it be different things. And as you might expect, given the navigation situation, the upper screen is for basically everything else. Navigation, settings, phone, Bluetooth, radio, basically everything you might want contained in these two Audi screens. And by the way, I want to clarify a point I made about these screens in another Audi video I did a couple of months ago. I said that you can touch these screens, but you have to push down and tap. You can't just tap with your finger. It doesn't recognize that. You actually have to push, and then the screen will recognize your tap by vibrating a little bit. A lot of people thought I was wrong. You can just tap it, surely. Basically, every other car has that. That is not true. You can see right now, I'm giving the screen light taps, and it is not responding to my commands. It's recognizing the taps, but it doesn't do anything with them. In order for the screen to actually respond, you do have to push it down. I do consider that to be the biggest drawback of this infotainment system. Other cars have simple interfaces like a smartphone where you just slide your finger around, not the RS7 or other Audi models. But anyway, speaking of screens in here, let's talk gauge cluster screen. Again, I've gone over this in a lot of other Audi models, so I will link those in the description below. But the basics are pretty simple. It's very configurable. You can have it highlight whatever you want. If you want a giant map in your gauge cluster, you can do that. Or you can see your phone, your media, whatever. This is one of the best gauge cluster technologies in the car industry. And I have to say, here's something nice and new that I like about this. If you're on certain screens, you can have the tachometer right in the center, and you can see it's like these two bars of tachometer rather than your normal boring old dial. And that looks very cool and very sporty and very fitting with the RS car. And speaking of the RS-ness of this car, you have a button on the steering wheel marked RS mode. Now in this car, you can switch between different drive modes. You have sport, comfort, efficient, but RS mode takes sport a step further. You press it once and you go into RS1, and that's a very sporty configuration. You press it a second time and you go into RS2, and then the driver aids turn off, traction control and that sort of thing, and you're pretty much on your own. That's for like hardcore racetrack use, but that little button on the steering wheel lets you switch right in with a simple tap in case you're driving along one day and you find yourself on a racetrack. And next up we move on to the back of the RS7, which is notable because as a sloped back car, this is a hatchback, which the Mercedes E63 and the BMW M5 are not. And you can see in here, it is quite a large cargo area, a lot bigger than your typical sedan trunk. It goes very far back, and it seems very wide and large and very usable and practical, although not as practical as the Audi RS6 Avant, which is basically this car except a station wagon. Now, I prefer the RS6 Avant. I like fast, practical cars like that, but I suspect most buyers will prefer the RS7, at least in the States. We generally prefer sedans, and these four-door coupes have been popular, and I suspect this car will sell in bigger numbers. Even though it's not quite as practical, it's still pretty practical back here, and certainly more practical than a sedan. As for my own opinion about the styling of this car, I never really liked how the initial A7 looked. I thought it was kind of a strange looking car, but over the years, I think it has improved a lot, and this RS7 in particular, I think, is gorgeous. You have these flared fenders that really show muscle and make it seem like an especially spry and sporty car. I also like the black trim on the rocker panels, which to me makes the car look more athletic and seem visually smaller. It makes it seem not like such a bloated, large luxury car, and more like the RS car that it's supposed to be. I think that small detail is a really nice touch in terms of how this car looks. And by the way, one other visual item worth noting in this car, it has huge brakes in front. As you can see, these are not carbon ceramic brakes, they're traditional steel, but they do have red brake calipers. That's a $500 option, and in my opinion, it is one very much worth getting. Makes the car look a lot sportier and a lot more exciting with those red calipers, like a performance car should. And finally, we move under the hood. Like I said, turbo V8, 590 horsepower, 590 pound-feet of torque. This thing has serious muscle. This is the same engine in so many Volkswagen Group high-end performance cars. The RS6 that I reviewed, but also the Porsche Cayenne Turbo, the Panamera Turbo, the Bentley Bentayga, the Lamborghini Urus. They all have this engine in various different states of tune. It's kind of crazy how many modern high-end performance cars use this powertrain. Then again, it is a pretty good powertrain. I've liked it in all those cars, and I'm excited to test it out in this one. So it's time to get the RS7 out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the RS7. Now I have to admit, I have done quite a few Audi RS cars, especially lately. The RSQ8, the RS6, the RS7 have all come out within the span of, I guess, about 4 months here at the end of 2020. And I'm thrilled by this. I have complained in previous videos that there simply aren't enough Audi RS cars. They have held back so many of these cars from the US market. For years, we didn't get an RS4, we didn't get an RS6, RS3, and finally they are coming, and they are now here, and it's so magical. I'm so happy. Now the drawback though, at least for my purposes, is a lot of these cars are pretty similar. I mean, this is essentially an RS6 with a different rear end. So I don't really expect the driving experience to be that different. Now the benefit is they all drive amazingly. This powertrain is great. It's one of the best on the market, incredibly responsive the moment you step on the throttle. It's really a great car. A lot of these turbo engines I'm a little bit nervous about. They're not necessarily the most responsive, which is a bit of a problem with turbo engines. You know, naturally aspirated V8 has a lot of torque down low. Even Audi's turbo V6 that's in the RS5 has a little bit of a delay, at least relative to this car. You press the throttle in this thing and it flies instantly. A fantastic powertrain. This car also, just like the RS6, benefits from being comfortable and smooth if you want it to be. That's one of the coolest things about modern luxury cars generally, is that they're nice if you want them to be nice, or they're monster angry things if you want them to be that. I came up to film this car and drove it not really expecting it to be that different from the RS6, and indeed it isn't, and no surprise given my car history. If you know anything about me, I would prefer the RS6. I just would rather have a wagon. I think having that extra practicality, it's just such a, it messes with your mind. Like a station wagon shouldn't be that fast, but it is. However, I think a lot more people are probably gonna buy the RS7. Like I mentioned, in America at least, it's considered to be more stylish to have like a coupe looking car or a sedan-y looking car than a wagon. And so this is gonna be where I suspect most of the buyers will be versus, you know, M5 and E63. This car makes some excellent noises. One thing I'm a little bit surprised by. Fortunately, this car still has a big V8, but it's a turbo one. It's only 4 liters. It's not like it's a big old 7-liter V8, but it still sounds pretty nice. You drive around, you hear some good sounds. And if you want it to be a luxury car, it can be that. You put it in comfort mode and you don't really hear the sounds all that much. Overall, I haven't really driven this car incredibly hard, in large part because I've done so many cars with this engine. RSQ8, RS6, but also Bottega, Panamera Turbo, Cayenne Turbo, etc. I kind of get the idea. It really comes down to, you know, which one do you like the best, which brand name, which styling, and then on the driving dynamics a little bit as well. You know, this car doesn't handle like an Urus or a Panamera necessarily, but it's pretty close. But it's very similar to RSQ8 and RS6. Ultimately though, it's a fantastic car. These are so amazing. They're so much fun. They're so fast. The technology is great. And I'm so happy that we seem to be in an Audi RS revolution after so many years of Audi denying us the ability to have these RS cars. They're all here now. They're amazing. And from what the dealers tell me, they seem to be selling, sometimes way over sticker. There's a lot of interest in these cars right now. And so that's the 2021 Audi RS7. I would personally prefer the RS6 Avant. I'm a wagon person, but the RS7 will be a great choice for a lot of people who are also considering a BMW M5 or a Mercedes-AMG E63. I'm just happy, frankly, that we've got all these new Audi RS models here in North America. They've really stepped up their high-performance game. And now it's time to give the RS7 a DOUGSCORE. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the RS7 is handsome, very nice for a 4-door hatchbacky thing, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Acceleration does 0 to 60 in 3.3-ish seconds, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Handling is very sharp for a larger 4-door luxury-ish car, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Fun factor is also huge for a car like this, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Finally, cool factor, and these are very cool. The RS7 is highly exciting for car fans, but not, you know, exotic sports car exciting, and it gets a 6 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 35 out of 50. Next up are the the daily categories and features, the RS7 is loaded and has a ton of tech, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Comfort, the RS7 is shockingly nice considering its level of performance, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Quality is excellent, materials are fantastic, though I do worry a bit about long-term reliability, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Practicality is good, better than a sedan, but not hugely so, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Finally, value, and this offers a lot, but it also costs a lot, especially when you know a big depreciation hit is coming. It gets a 5 out of 10 for a total daily score of 35 out of 50. Added up, and the DOUGSCORE is 70 out of 100, and you can see where it stacks up against relevant cars. The RS7 does well, great in fact, very competitive with the BMW M5, the Mercedes GT63, the Panamera Turbo, and the RS6. Ultimately though, I would rather have an RS6. It's more practical and more special, though I suspect the RS7 will be easier to come by with a larger production run, or at least in the United States.